So this is the celebration of mind. And the celebration of mind is to find joy in mathematics. And everybody here is really inspired by the work of Martin Gardner. So the celebration of mind is put on by the Gathering for Gardner Foundation, where people every 2 years get together and for a bunch of days just having a wonderful time with recreational mathematics. Before I turn it over to Tim and Tanya, I'd like to give you a little bit of background. In Mime-matics, Tanya and Tim Chartier explore mathematical ideas through the art of mime, whether creating an illusion of an invisible wall, wearing a mask covered with geometric shapes, or pulling on an invisible rope. Tim and Tanya Chartier delve into mathematical concepts such as estimating, tiling, and infinity. Through Mime-matics, audiences encounter math through the entertaining style of a performing artist who have performed at local, national, and international settings. The Chartiers have trained in master classes with world-renowned mime artist Marcel Marceau and at Les Centres du Silence Mime School. Come enjoy a show seen in Japan, the Netherlands, South Korea, Panama, and throughout the United States.
Very good. It's a delight to be with you today. My name is Tanya Chartier, and we're very pleased to be able to share with you today some of our performance from our Mime-matics show.
One of the interesting things about being in Zoom is that there's always the inherent decision of, do we actually try to find a space in our house where we can do a mime presentation? I think people think we have a full-fledged studio in our house where we practice. We're just really good at practicing in very small spaces. While we're good at practicing in them, we're not really good at zooming in them. So what we're going to do is we're going to combine some of the parts of our presentation that very much amend themselves to this little itty bitty spot where I do my Zoom teaching. And then we're going to show you some videos that we have that, in a sense, we found that people actually somewhat prefer seeing the videos because it's exactly what you can show somebody else, which is kind of fun. It's different when it's live, but the video offers that as well. So we are delighted to be here because if there is any place that's the closest to being like Willy Wonka of mathematics, it's Gathering for Gardner. And all of the Gardner things that are out there, it's just one treat and delight after another. So let's walk into mime and see how in the world is mime connected to math. So where we're going to start are actually with something that isn't really mime, but it definitely has a performance edge to it. One of the things I loved about Martin Gardner was that there would just be things from everyday life that I could play with and show people mathematics within it. This is a blend of mathematics and psychology, but that was part of the charm of Martin Gardner's writing, was that he would show the intersection of math with many different fields. So right here you see, let me hold it close, you see two coffee holders you would get at a coffee shop to hold the mug. And of course, they're the same size. But what a lot of people don't know is if you take one of them, I'll have Tanya hold this one so that you can continue to see it. If you rub it against your head, it makes it kind of pliable so that you can pull it. And the amazing part is it makes it longer. But it doesn't have to stay longer because you just flick it and it's the same size. It's amazing. You don't actually have to do it in your head, against your head. It's easier, but some people find that embarrassing. But if you practice enough, you can wiggle it and then it gets longer. You flick it and it's the same size. If you blow on it, it gets even smaller. Now, what in the world is going on with that? It turns out that the reason for it is because of the angled edge. Can you see that on the side? It's angled. And the psychology is that for most of us, not all of us, but for most of us, that angle looks lined up. That's actually lined up, but that looks lined up. I use this in math class all the time. Why? This is why you show your work. Telling me that you see it doesn't always mean that it's true. So this is a fun one, but one performance tip. The first time you do this, if you rub against your head or whatever you do, I wouldn't pull. I would just rub it against your head and then say it changes size. Because if you say it gets longer, you got to remember the longer one goes on the bottom. First time I did it, I put it on the top and I said it gets longer. The bottom one, or something like that, just to kind of save face with the whole thing. Either practice a lot so that you remember which way to go, or just don't commit to which one gets longer. So that's one that you can take with you that, at least to me, feels at least a little bit Gardner-esque.
All right, the next illusion is a little bit more traditional mime. In this, what I'm going to do is create a ball. Now, my ball just appeared out of the air, which is the wonderful thing about mime. We can have our props wherever we go. So you can create your ball yourself, but I'm going to share with you what I like to do. No ball. Of course there's no ball. Is there a ball there? No. And yet it seems as if there is. Why? It's all about the illusion. No ball. And yet we can have great fun playing with our audience, playing with kids, playing with adults, and just creating some kind of a geometric shape, giving it weight, giving it trajectory, and following it with our eyes.
Okay, but there's something I want to know. How in the world is that bag working? Because something's going in there.
I bet people have a guess out there. Giving a moment for thought.
She's hitting it with her leg. That is a very good guess.
I am pretty coordinated, but I'm not quite sure I could do that in this cramped quarters.
Let's have Tanya hold it up a little bit farther. Let me help. There you go. Now let me drop it. And it's still, so yeah, that was a good one. Not with her body. Yeah, those are easy because of the 2 dimensions.
Good
so let's
question.
hold it all the way out there. My hand isn't really in there, so I'll throw it from down here.
Turn it so you can
I'll
see
throw it, and it's far enough away. It really is just the bag. And here's the hint, her hand.
See how I hold it?
She jerks her hand. That is a very good guess. You're very close.
Very good idea.
Here we go. See if you see it now. Oh, did you see it? Oh, there it is. It's a snap
Somebody
of a finger.
got it. Snap of the finger. Exactly.
Tanya, I can't snap my finger. I can't seem to make that
It
sound.
doesn't matter. It's the movement. The movement creates the image. So it's just the suddenness of the movement, and it gives the shake that is needed. And then the other key thing to create the illusion, of course, is your visual line. And this is one, if any of you who are teachers, professors out there, or anyone who has a number of people in a room at any given time, you can do this exact same thing, which is if you give your attention somewhere in the distance, you'll find other people, once you continue to keep your attention there, will begin to look there as well. Why? Because your focus is there. And if you put your focus there, they will also put their focus there. So in performing, we use this all of the time. So anyway, that's a really fun thing to do, especially right before you start a lecture. So anyway, lots of good fun. So that is the mime ball, and it is a fun illusion to play with. And it's also a fun thing to engage with audiences, where you can start with a ball that is small, you can make it larger, you can give it more weight, and you can have a good time playing with all those dynamics of weight, size, and shape.
One important piece that Tanya mentioned is the fact that you don't need to be able, I actually can make a snapping sound, but you don't need to be able to. That means that you can teach it to children who are at the point at which they can make the mechanical maneuver, but they can't snap their fingers. I can't think how young of children we've had, but they've been lower elementary. Yeah, 5, yeah, who make the illusion. And sometimes their ball moves like ridiculously fast, but it's comical, and I mean, literally comic, not just funny that they're doing it, but it's literally funny how fast this ball will move and move into the bag. And so the one thing to keep in mind is the bag will wear out over time. So if you do it a lot, the bag will wear out. All that to say, it's a lot of fun. So we want to give you a couple tips. All right, we also want to teach you some mime illusions before we show you some of the mime sketches, because mime illusions are one place that you actually begin to see that mimes are definitely, if nothing else, using measurement and geometry, but it also shows that you can be a mime.
Right. So I want to share with you a mime wall. That's the illusion most people have heard of. A mime wall. My hand, just here, stuck in space. What makes it seem believable? The measured approach of my hands, estimating their space so that they are realistic rather than something not so realistic, right? And so you can create the same illusion by simply putting your hands on your head, feeling the shape of your hands. They're nice and rounded. Take them off. You notice that they're somewhat rounded. They still maintain that shape. Turn them toward me. Now you can't see that they're still rounded, but they are. Turn them back toward each other. Make them flat. You can see the difference. Make them rounded again. Turn them toward the screen. Move one up and make it flat. Move the other one up and make it flat. And as you continue to do this pattern, moving your hands from rounded to flat, you create the image of a mime wall. Repetition, estimation, approximation. These are all things that are happening, and they're wonderful things to teach children especially, but for all of us to play with.
One thing that's important to point out with mathematical audiences is that sometimes mathematicians can get very, very concerned about, is this flat? It turns out that it doesn't have to be exactly flat. In fact, when we trained with Marcel Marceau, Marceau would actually purposely on stage not make his wall completely flat. And he would point out, it's not the fact that I touched the wall and that the wall looks perfect, but it's why I touched the wall that keeps people engaged. And so if you get too worried about it, it can actually look less realistic. And then let's do one more thing. Tanya, can you teach tuck? We're going to teach you something called tuck. We don't normally do this, but somehow in this pinhole of existence, I feel connected to you. So we're going to actually teach you something we don't normally teach.
All right. So what Tim is talking about is a little technique. So we have this rounded shape, right, with our hands, and then we take them and we make them flat. That suddenness of movement, going from rounded to flat, and then giving it a little bit of a,
there you go,
a suddenness of the movement. We go kind of like a talk. And that's what we talk about it being, T-O-C-K, talk.
It's what people use for robot, for instance. It's often used for that. Now, you may have noticed that Tanya and I didn't do that at the beginning. When Tanya and I do the wall, we actually don't use talk. That's because we're being snobby mimes. In mime, it's kind of prestigious if you don't need talk. But you just are beginning, so be snotty later. But for now, sometimes using that, I'm actually not that good at doing it anymore. If you use the talk, it can eliminate some of the did it just go flatness of your hand. I'm good at doing talk. I'm not very good at teaching it. So that's why I asked Tanya to show it to you, because if you only have me around, you're not going to learn it. But if you have Tanya around, you have a really good chance in terms of that. Is there anything else with talk?
I think with talk, I think the biggest thing is just thinking about the suddenness and imagining when you hit the wall, so that you're trying to keep the same distance from where you are to where your hand hits it. So that, again, is kind of estimating how far your hand is going, because you want to keep it realistic. It doesn't have to be perfect again, but this kind of a difference really does not come across correctly, even in 2 dimension.
The creator of the wall was a mime named Tony Montanaro. Many people think mime probably had the wall forever. It turns out that the wall was created, the wall illusion was created in the 1960s. Tony Montanaro would say, just commit to where that wall is. And once you've touched it, move on in terms of where your hand is. You can get very, very technical with it if you become a mime, but that's for a later time.
Very good.
So somebody did ask, does it work more realistic in Zoom or in person? Actually, I don't know. And one of the weirdest things about it is it doesn't feel like I'm doing anything. I mean, I'm not touching anything. So it actually feels more realistic to me in person because we'll actually hear the audience go, whoa. Here, it doesn't really feel like I'm doing much. So I hope that it's like, is it better in person? Because that looked terrible. So hopefully it actually feels like it looks real. One other quick thing, my hand, I'm kind of warm where we're sitting right now. My hand normally lightens when I hit the wall.
It is. I can see it.
Can
on
you
the
see? Is
screen.
it? Okay,
Yeah.
good.
It's much more than mine. You can see it.
I don't know why my hand does that. So I'm not sitting here going, whiten, whiten, whiten. It just happens to do it.
Body.
It's just my body. And Marceau's, I don't think lightened when he did it, and his was amazing. So anyway, it's something to work on. And that's probably one thing I said that's really important with mime. Eventually you need to show it to somebody, because when I first did the rope illusion, I couldn't tell what would it look like. And I showed it to Tanya and she went, oh, that looks really good. And I was like, oh, and that process of having people tell you that is part of what creates the confidence in the actual illusion. All right.
Thanks. That was wonderful.
Okay, so I'm going to try something with you where rather than making it flat, one of the fun things is that you can actually use geometric thinking. So one thing you can do is put yourself in a box. So let's see if we can do that. I'm going to put a box between me and Tanya because I don't have enough room. I have enough room over here, but I don't in Zoom. You won't see me. So let's start here, make your wall. And then what you do is you leave one hand on the wall. If you let them go, you actually, in mime, forget it's there, which is completely ridiculous. I mean, if I touch the wall, it's not like, oh, wow, you know, it's not there. But you can have the wall let go and then hit the wall and then move from there. Usually you do that with your feet, but I can't do that. I'm seated. So you leave one hand there, and then you bring your other hand and you touch the wall to the side. You see it? Notice that my hand's flat. Sometimes you have to work on that to get a flat hand. Then you can move your other hand and move up. And then you could also make a ceiling. Am I too high? I'm too high. You can make a ceiling like this. Hopefully I'm staying flat. Ceilings and sidewalls are much harder to be exact.
Especially when you've got a screen.
Yeah. Yeah, the screen makes it even worse in terms of where we are. Okay, now let's try something else. We're going to put ourselves inside of an ellipsoid, inside of an egg or a balloon. If you've taken Calc 3, then we can say ellipsoid for some reason other than in Calc 3. So we go up and you just slowly give yourself some curvature like that. Then come back down. Then you can add some physics into it. So you kind of push your shoulder forward, leave your hands as best you can where they are, and you're going to push forward and then come back and then go bow, wow, wow, like that. In mime, you don't say that, but that's often what's going through your head. All right. So try it again. Push and then back. Bow, wow, wow. How do you and Tanya do that at the same time? It's called marital bliss. It's called years of performing together. Like one that we used to do in mime class. We weren't planning to do this. Yeah, she knows what I'm doing. So we're going to go to the right. Is when you're on a ship and you just slowly get on the ship, and then either one of you or both of you begins to feel a little bit funny with being on the ship. And how do we know what we're doing? Well, one, can you see that our hands are touching? That's the only thing that's indicating where we are. Okay, I gotta stop. But we might have gotten to Philadelphia on there. So anyway, that's an illusion that we used to do. Marceau loved that illusion. I think the man had a 10-year-old sense of humor, which meant I loved his humor in terms of that. But it was a lot of fun and a lot of things where you sync. If you ever were in acting class and you mirror each other,
yes, that's always
that's a lot of what we do in mime. So that Tanya and I were always good at it, so that then we could do like a mirror sketch, which we actually had at one time, but we don't perform much anymore. Okay.
So we've shared with you the wall, and Tim has shared with you that you can play with geometric shapes. You can think angular, you can think a little bit rounded, kind of more the ellipsoidal, but we can also think about mathematical concepts. And Tim is going to share with you a sketch called The Infinite Rope. And as you watch this one, I want you to think about what is infinity. And this is one that we especially enjoy sharing with young children. We get wonderful answers to our questions when we pose what is infinity, and then can you see infinity within this sketch? And some of the answers are just delightful. So consider infinity and what you see in this sketch.
If you pay careful attention to my footwork in this, This is a sketch that when we performed it in Korea, they particularly liked the footwork. So that's the infinite rope. We'll talk about a couple parts of the sketch that you can actually pick up. The one thing I want to point out is if you actually are interested in that sketch, it's really easy to find using Google. You put in infinite rope, and then if you can remember our name, just Tim Chartier will work. Then the account happens to be under my name. If you put in Tim Chartier infinite rope, it's the only thing. So that's an easy way. And then you can click the name and you can find the other sketches as well. So one of the things we talk about after we've performed that sketch, when we're like, for instance, in elementary school shows, you know, where they all come in, they sit on the floor and the kindergartners are on a little carpet square and they're all watching, is at the end we'll say, so the rope went on forever in both directions. And then I, the mime, had the scissors and cut the rope and a big part of it went away. How much rope remains? And there'll be all kinds of answers. So take a second and think, if it's younger kids, anything in elementary school, what kind of answers do you think there might be? Yes, that is the most common answer, is half the rope. Half the rope is usually, hand goes up, half the rope. The one that I call the college student answer is a lot, a lot. Usually that comes up. My favorite answer was the following. I asked the question differently than I just did. So I'm holding the rope and I said, how much rope remains in my hand? The hand went up and the child said, 2 inches. And there were so many teachable ways to respond to that. I did not respond with any of them. I just went, huh? Thank you. Anyone else? Meanwhile, my mind is going, what in the world? And then I said again to the group, so how much rope remains in my hand? And I went, ah. And I turned to the child and I went, how much rope remains in my hand? 2 inches. And it was the response of the child that I'm storytelling, but there is no elaboration in this. The child, so I go, 2 inches. And the child goes, yeah. And so anyway, it was delightful. But generally, eventually, if you perform at a college, you'll sometimes get a faculty child that says infinite amount. But generally, in other audiences, someone will say it still goes on forever. And it really emphasizes how infinity, while measuring size, is very different than finite numbers, which we often talk about. The other part of the sketch, which is what I use in class in calculus, is the part where I have the rope and I cut it and I cut it and I cut it, and I think of it as cutting it in half. You may not have thought of it that way, which is fine. And then there's the part where I go like that, and that's as if I cut it infinitely many times. So I ask a calculus class, if I cut it infinitely many times, how much was left in my hand? You know, they know that, particularly if they take AP calculus, like, wow, I can answer that one. And they say nothing. And I go, exactly. That's why the mime didn't blow anything away. And those are two of the main ways that we use that. Is there any part of the mime that we often teach? I'm trying to think if there is specifically.
I think one of the things we teach is parallels. When we talk about, if you saw Tim with his arms out, his arms would be out this way and he would pull in this direction with his arms. So his line of movement, the arms are coming in this direction, but at the same time, the feet go the opposite direction. So they're parallels, but they're opposite parallels. And that's partly what creates the illusion. And so we often teach that, and it's a great mathematical concept, but it's very critical to the mime illusion and making it believable. And so whenever I teach this, and I used to teach middle school theater, or I teach this in a workshop with someone, they have to understand what parallel means and why are those two things going in the opposite directions, and why do the arms have to have that kind of straight line to create that illusion. So that's an important factor. If my hands were like this, that's not really going to look like I'm holding a rope, right? So we have to keep that line solid and really clearly there.
There's actually two illusions in that sketch. One is the one Tanya's talking about where I'm pulling. The other one is actually where I get pulled. Getting pulled, the key to that is surprise. Obviously, I'm choosing when I get pulled, but I have to just think of being surprised and being jerked like that. And you can do the same thing with getting pushed with somebody. So if we're sitting really close and
I can do it.
like
Sorry.
that. And you can, if you think surprise, it just feels more real, even though nothing happens at all. All right, so we have another sketch for you. This is a very popular one. It's one in which I am in a gigantic dryer vent. And it's the most popular sketch we perform. And one of the mathematical concepts in this is just, where is Tim? Sounds kind of silly, but as you watch, you may find that it's a more challenging question than it seems. We'll see. Let's watch together.
What do you think? Was it hard to follow, Tim? Was it fairly straightforward? I know by the end you probably had an idea of where he was. That's the easiest part, right?
One thing that sometimes people ask is, can I turn around? No, I cannot. I am unable to turn around. And so
I think he was in the tube.
I'm going to let
Good
you put in
call.
your, yeah, that's the college answer, the college student answer. I'm going to tell you a story about how I got the tube. We don't always tell this story, but it's one of our favorite stories to tell. So that sketch is based on work by a Swiss mime troupe by the name of Mime-matics. Their use of the tube is different, but still it's very much inspired by theirs.
Mhm.
And when I saw that, I was so excited that I called Ace Hardware, like a Lowe's or a Home Depot, and I said, I want a dryer vent that I can get inside. They go, what? And I go, you know, like a dryer vent on the back of a dryer, the tube, the slinky looking thing. I want one big enough that I can get inside. Do you know if there is such a thing? Yeah. Do you have one? No. And oh no, first they said, what do you want to do with it? I'm like, I'm a mime. A what? I'm a dancer. You're going to dance in it? Yeah. And they went, oh, no, we don't have one. Oh, okay. Is there someone else I can call? So they gave me the next person. Hello, I'm looking for a dryer vent that's big enough that I can get inside of it. What? Why? Well, I'm a mime. A what? I'm going to dance in it. Oh, no, we don't have one. Well, do you know where I could call? So I called the next place, same thing. Finally, they told me another place, and I called and I said, hello, I'm trying to get a dryer vent that I can dance inside. And do you have one? And this gruff voice goes, yeah, we have them. You do? Yeah. And then he goes, we actually have them in several sizes. We have 16-inch, 18-inch, 20-inch, and 22-inch diameter. And he was quiet and I was quiet. And then he said, do you want to come down and try them on? And I'm like, yeah, I guess. Where are you? Turns out that they were like 7 minutes from my house. So I drove up and the entire factory was at a standstill. They all were pseudo working, but they were all waiting for what I became known as the worm guy showed up. And I show up and they have them lined up on the factory floor. And he's like, all right, let's try them on. So I get inside and I pull it up and he goes, all right, well, why don't you jiggle around a little bit? So I move around a thing, I bring it down. This very, very gruff guy goes, that's too small. So he was right. And then, so then I try the next one on, it was too small. And he looks at the other guy, he goes, I don't think these are going to work. And he goes, no, I don't either. And it turns out that we were living in Kalamazoo, Michigan. It turns out that in Grand Rapids, Michigan, an hour north, there was another factory that had the 22-inch. And he said, we can have that tomorrow. Can you come back tomorrow? And I was like, sure. So I came back the next day. They had the 20-inch, the 22-inch. I got in the 22-inch and he goes, yeah, that's going to work real good. And so from there, I went home and practiced for about a month with it because you can actually, it's 25 feet long. So you can actually get lost if the ends actually blow out and you don't know where they go because you can't see when you're inside except when you're holding it up and looking. But that's one of our favorite stories of how it's used.
Another fun fact is that it definitely does suction to the ground. You have to be careful to keep a little bit of airflow because if you don't, it can suction to the ground and it's really hard to move around in. So
Tanya, I think you will be able to explain this, and quite literally, we didn't talk about this. But can you try to explain how I do the donut shape for them?
So the way I tend to think about the donut shape is just as I mentioned that we have to create an airflow. So Tim always uses one of his feet, his back foot, upstage foot, if you will, to kick out and lift up the bottom of the tube so that he can have that airflow. And then he leans forward and literally is like kind of like this, where he would be standing here over. And it bends over. And then he reaches his hand around and grabs. So he has extra down by his feet and he kicks out a little bit extra. And then he pulls it around and just creates a donut. Now, when he rolls, and you saw that part, he does not do a somersault like I do. He does not do somersaults
at all.
I'm a gymnast. He's not. And so he rolls just backwards, just like anybody could if you bend backwards and just roll back onto your back. And that's all he's doing. So it's a little bit deceiving at times. People sometimes think he does a full circle. He stands up, he turns around. No, it's a little bit more simplistic, but it's about the twisting, the turning, and then the use of using his hands to move it. And he holds it in different ways and shapes. And you might notice that when you could see into the tube, you never did get a glimpse of Tim. That is very intentional. The only times audiences have actually seen him is when we've had that unfortunate accident where a tube ripped apart mid-stage, and we had people interpret it as, you know, the tube was giving birth. It was really interesting. So that was a creative faux pas that happened, but it was very fun.
Yeah, and in fact, on that sketch, I've watched it. My classes like to watch it, and then they learn from other classes that I'll show it. So I show it most semesters. There's one little part where you can see my hand, and it's because the camera was on a different angle than I thought. And so I made that mistake in the sketch, and that happens in performance too. Every so often, people can see my hand. If you watch it again, it's purposely choreographed to be physically or geometrically confusing. There's an opening move where, if you look very carefully, I'm not standing on my hands, but all my weight, my legs are over my head. And I'm entirely balanced on my shoulders and my head. And that's what spatially throws people for the whole sketch. So anyway, if you watch it again, you can look for that.
His feet are up and moving the end of the tube, which is kind of crazy to think about, but it's really kind of fun. So.
Yeah, and that's the most important part of the sketch, to actually throw people in what we're going to do. All right, do you have any questions? We want to field some questions. We have a couple things we can do with you, but we want to be sure we answer some of your questions, because we want to be sure you can walk away doing things that you want to do, because to us, that's very much part of the celebration of mind.
Yeah, so I've seen at least 4 questions that have come up in the chat, and there may be more. So audience members, if I'm missing your question, let me know. So when you were teaching us to do the wall, Suyash asked, how many hours are needed to do to get this down? In other words, I think that means, like, if we practice this at home, how long is it going to take till we look good?
So I think that is kind of a matter of opinion, but I think that honestly, you can learn some very basic things with mime and very quickly be performing. It has to do with primarily believing in what you're doing and trusting some basic components. One of the things that you learned was kind of that approximation piece. Another thing that we use all the time is fixed point, getting the idea of keeping something fixed in space, which we know, of course, with physics, it's not possible to fix something in space, like my hand on a molecule and keep it there. But what you're trying to do is keep that in space, and then relative to that place, to move the rest of your body around it. And a lot of illusions in mime work with fixed point. If you learn fixed point, that's one that is key to learn. So if you do that, that creates an image of pushing and an illusion that something is there, like this, creating the idea that I can't move something, and then creating a box and being able to use that same movement. And now what I'm doing is, instead of being fixed in space, my hands are fixed relative to one another. So I could move the box forward or backward. Now it looks bigger because of the, you know, the image with the video, but then also creating a space. Let's say I had a ball and I wanted to create that ball and keep that same image of how big that ball is. One of the exercises we do with people is try to move your hands and keep that relative space. So using that fixed point or fixed relative point is one of the key things in mime. Another thing that is basic to learn is a couple of walks. Reality is all of us can walk regularly. You don't have to do a mime walk. So you can do that, and you can create some ideas of sketches. So a lot of it has to do with, there's tons of training you can do, but you could really start doing this with about 3 hours of training. Your precision will not look the same as if you have trained for years and have that precision, but there are people who have and have done an amazing job.
Yeah, and the 3 things that Tanya underscored there that just I want to emphasize is so important is that if you learn the fixed point, if you learn how to do a wall, because you can make the wall something like when we pick our ball, we're actually doing the same illusion as the wall, if you think about it, because we're just making that shape real. And then the last one is talk that she taught you earlier, that when you get something and you pick it up, you can use talk for that. If you do those 3 things, then you can begin to do mime, and you just do something for somebody. It doesn't have to be a full sketch. I used to pick flowers when I first learned mime. I would sniff a flower and then give it to somebody. And that was basically the only thing I ever did, just because it gave me something that I could try.
And one of the things that Marceau taught us that's so critical is breath. And we all, again, have this innately within us. So what makes something seem real? Feeling it, really feeling it, using your breath and your movement to create lyricism. It's something that adds so much to whatever you do.
Yeah, and the other quick thing that we do a lot of is you'll see us suspend our body. That comes from our Marceau training too, is if you think suspension, it just gives it a sense of enhancement for what it's worth. It doesn't make it feel usual. That isn't quite saying how long, but that's because it varies between people. Some people just have a sense of timing, so they almost begin immediately. But that's, you know, that just is whatever it is. If it's fun, you can just practice. What else?
So Siosh also asked, right after you had taught us the wall, whether you paint your faces when you perform.
Great question. We opt not to do so. You know, within the United States, there's so much negative imagery around clowns and around dolls and different things like that. And unfortunately, white face can give off or scare some children who've had exposure to things that have just been negative. So the whole purpose of the white face initially, and the reasoning for it, was to communicate over long distances. And so the reason we haven't done that is we're usually on stage, or we're in a more intimate setting where we don't need the makeup for that kind of expansion of our images of our face. You want to talk more about Marceau and why he did it?
Marceau used white face because he was honoring the 19th century mime Brault. And so that's why he used it. And he actually didn't wear white face when he performed in much of the world, but he was so associated with it in the United States that usually, even if he came with a presentation that didn't have white face, he would be asked only to do the white face presentations. I never felt like it upset him. It's just what he would do in the United States, which upset us because we would like to see him do the other things, but we enjoyed anything he did. What else?
So Eric asked, right after you showed the infinite rope clip, what about the thickness of the rope?
Very nice.
Yeah. I think in that sketch, I give it some thickness. In terms of my hand, I don't hold my hand tight. Like I don't hold it like a thread. I do give it, so can you see the difference there? I hold my hand like that rather than like that. And if I hold it like this, it does make a difference. So I give it some thickness. And then like Tanya was saying, you just stay completely consistent with it. One of the things that's kind of interesting about that infinite rope, that is not one recording. We actually didn't have enough cameras to record the different angles. I actually performed that multiple times. And the videographer, who's a very good friend, he commented in the editing that clearly we've practiced that thing, because he commented that I'm almost exactly the same every time in terms of where it is. And that mainly comes through rehearsal. I do have a very strong body memory. My body memory is very strong, which is helpful. But that time I had to remember anything I improv'd, because he told me when we started, he said, you're going to have to do it the same. And I actually looked at Tanya because that made me really nervous. And I looked at her and she said, just remember your improv. And I went, oh yeah, okay. And so I was very careful with what I improv, that it was something that I could redo, if that makes sense. I hope that answered that. I think that's what you might be asking. What else?
Tony has asked, aside from yourselves, who are some of the best mimes currently performing today?
If you were to do a search, you would come across Dan Kamen, Lauren, I just blanked on his name, Psalm. We worked with, well, Tony Montanaro is no longer living, but he was really well known. Tim mentioned him earlier, having done the wall, but you can still find some of his materials, and he has great resources that are still available. Old school, I think, on VCR, but probably also on DVD for teaching mime if you would have interest. Let's see, who else do you want to point out?
Alexander Neander is out of Germany, and he was an assistant to Marceau. He is extremely physically talented. Bill Irwin is considered it's funny, it depends which circles you're in. In mime, we consider him a mime, but in clowning, they consider him a clown. And if I'm honest with you, the clowns win. If you happen to know who that is, he was on Broadway, and he is an amazing physical actor. But there are a lot of people who use mime. Robin Williams had training in mime. Dick Van Dyke had training in mime. In Red Skeleton. I don't know if he had training in mime, but he's always, one of the reasons he and Marceau had such a strong connection is because of the mime that they both did in very different ways.
About Lucille Ball and her physical humor with her body had some background in that as well.
Yeah, there are other mimes as well, but those are the ones that those are all male, so that's not terribly helpful.
We think about Shields and Yarnell. I mean, goodness.
Yeah, if you're willing to look up older mimes, Shields and Yarnell Robert Shields created the robot illusion when he was a street performer in San Francisco. He would just go out on Union Square and perform, and Shields really transformed mime into much more of a pop version of itself. They did wonderful work on the Muppet Show as well as other places, but Yarnell had this incredible ability to have super wide open eyes, and oh my goodness, I don't know how she did that. That was it's probably partially just physical, but part of that's not. Having Marceau, you do train in your eyes. That's amazing what she's able to do.
Having seen them as a couple was really wonderful imagery too, for us to be able to see. We've watched old videos and various things.
So along with this conversation, Mark asks, what about Slava Polunin?
Love Slava. When we saw Slava Snow Show for the first time, we were in heaven. We delighted in Slava, absolutely. Definitely, I would say the physical body control and artistry that Slava presents is just incredible.
Yeah, Slava, thank you we think of Slava as a clown only because his fundamental principles are the sense of play in the audience and the sense of incongruity. But he definitely is using that all the time. It's truly remarkable. That's one of the most amazing shows I've ever seen. So
we saw it on the heels of having trained with a clown in Seattle and having learned some really key principles of clowning, and in that context saw it not too long after we trained with her. So that's what stands out for us.
Yeah, and when we say clowning, we don't necessarily mean like circus clowning or birthday party clowning. Clowning in that situation is talking about theatrical clowning. So it's a little bit different in terms of that. Is there anything else?
What level do you teach, and do students like mymatics?
So I used to teach middle school theater, and my students had a blast with it. I would incorporate, I do units on mime, I do puppetry, I do clowning, I do some of the skills that are clown skills that people would just have a blast doing. And middle schoolers, even middle schoolers who are very self-conscious about life, because it's such a transformative time, loved it, because they could try on things and they could just enact things. And I honestly found it was a great way to bring out people who maybe haven't been comfortable in their bodies yet, because we would start with something as small as, what is this, right? And you start with, well, it's a candle, and then now it's anything but a candle. Now it's got to be a rolling pin, right? And we start using physical things, and then we start removing the physical things and having to use our bodies to create them. And you take that and you transition to the game like Where, and they have to go in and create a space, and in that space they have to act out that they are in the place and communicate it just through body language. And then once somebody else has guessed where they are, they can go and add to the scene, and together they create a scene just by their physical being and what their movements are, and it just begins to broaden. And so step by step they find themselves being able to communicate non-verbally, and then we have that conversation thinking about our own relationships and the way that we relate in the world. How much of communication is nonverbal? How much of it is our body language? I can say, I like that shirt, but you can tell by tone of voice or by somebody's body language, are they really being honest with you, or are they pulling your leg? And we play with those things and start to explore them.
I teach at the college level, and the infinite rope is a sketch I actually do in class to actually teach content. And the students really enjoy it, but I wouldn't necessarily say that they enjoy it more than other teaching. It's part of the way I talk and share. So they definitely enjoy it, but it's not like they're just sitting there waiting for the next time I do mime, because most students would say I probably do mime a lot anyway, in terms of like when I teach Calc 3, I'm definitely miming all over the place just in order to bring the ideas forward. What else?
Rick asks, can you mime a hole in the wall or a window?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Creating a window is really easy. You just create a window.
Here, did you see the talk and what she did? She had the talk in terms of taking it up. She had the fixed point in terms of where that was. And then she even had her eye get hit, but then she went back and got the windowsill right where it was. And then you don't have to take your head. You can have the window hit your head and then come back in, however you want to do it. Children love the window. You can do the window with young kids for like 15 minutes, which with young kids is like a marathon in terms of time. They love. The other one young children really enjoy really quick is the apple and the worm. So I'll do it as if you're a young child. You can just enjoy your childhood within you, but go out and pick the apple. We have the apple. Come down and take a bite. And how it tastes really good. Now take another bite. And now notice that there's a worm. Now on the count of 3, you decide, did you like it or did it make you queasy? And so you go 1, 2, 3, and they decide. Whatever they decide, they're like, and let's do it again. And so like it's like a 15-minute thing of eating worms. But anyway, it's a lot of fun.
All right, so we have 2 more questions. We have an anonymous attendee asking, who is better, clown or mime?
Oh, great question. I think that they are hand in hand. They work well together. To me, clowning is, I love doing clowning because clowning is the buffoon and the silliness. And part of the way we live out clowning is making fun of ourselves. One of the things that we are very animate about in our own performing is that we do not make fun of the audience. It is us who should be made fun of, and we can make fun of ourselves in one to each other, but never the audience. And for that reason, we're pretty strong about that, and we just love it. We just feel like it's a way to be connected to our audience, and that we are playful and we're intentional and we're helping people find joy in the world. For me, the mime, I just love the mime. I was a dancer growing up. And so for dancers, you're always trying to defy gravity. And with mime, you are rooted in gravity. That is what allows you to be in the world. And you're trying to show yourself. I mean, when you're walking, it's through the gravity that you have it there. And I think even though gravity by this is a different meaning, but I think mime allows you to bring gravity to topics that are really important. Marcel Marceau has The Death of a Soldier as a piece. It's very powerful, and you can touch people's hearts and minds in ways that that are different than clowning. And for that reason, to me, mime is just so incredibly powerful. So
yeah, they each have their place, just like dance. Dance, mime, and clowning to me are all siblings.
Last question, Dana asks, what
Is the role of Bip?
Oh, Bip was the main character. So Marceau would break his show into 2 parts. The first part was basically styles of mime that show you kind of the breadth and survey of mime, where he would have very abstract pieces and pieces that showed you how mime could act out the usual world, and he would be dressed basically in white. And then Bip was a character that he created where it's a character that encounters the world. And so that's why he was showing you both. I do want to point out one thing. I noticed Carl Schaefer, who's an extremely talented mathematician and dancer, he pointed out Avner the eccentric. And Avner is like massive. in the world of particularly clowning. And but as Carl pointed out, he isn't really a clown, he's himself in terms of what he does. So if you want to look up some really fun and funny things, Avner the Eccentric is definitely a place that you can go after us to enjoy more celebration of your mind.
So Tim and Tanya, this was so wonderful. Thank you. I can't wait to get on YouTube and look up a lot more performances. Everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you so much, Tim and Tanya. Bye-bye.